All right, on to episode 17, and a special one today because the new DLC came out. We are taking a bit of a backtrack because they added 3 new animals that begin with A. So today we are starting with the Alpaca, and I am looking really forward to this because since the new DLC and the update dropped, we can make walkthrough exhibits. And I feel like the Alpaca is one of the perfect ones to go with. Now, what we're going to be doing at the moment is we are setting up our environment, and pretty much the way I want to do this is have it sort of layered. It's based on some of the old Incan ruins of Peru, and since how that is where alpacas are from, it just seems fitting to do so. Now, while I set up the foundation of our exhibit, let's discuss the animal in question. Now, the alpaca, just like the llama, is actually a camelid, aka it's related to camels, and they are a little bit smaller than llamas. They only come up to about 3 feet at the shoulder, opposed to the llama, which can get to about 5 feet. And are famous for their extremely soft and comfortable fleece, and we will get to that in a short minute. However, let's talk about the bare bones information, like where they're from, which would be the Andes mountain range in South America. More specifically, it was tamed by the native peoples in the area of Bolivia, Peru, and Chile. It is one of the oldest tamed animals in human history, of originally being domesticated roughly 6,000 years ago. Now, while the animal is known for its fleece, it was also bred and domesticated for its meat as well, as many animals are. The most famous part of the animal that is farmed is the fleece, essentially being its fur. It would be grown out and shaved down, sort of like how you would a sheep for its wool. The fleece is actually some of the highest quality material to make clothing out of, even to this day, at least naturally speaking, because there's a lot of really interesting advantages to it, starting with the fact that it's dense, which means it can keep you warm. It's soft compared to pretty much most others like wool. It's lightweight, and the most interesting fact is it is hypoallergenic. A lot of other furs can cause slight allergy-related issues. The fleece of the alpaca actually is exempt from this. In addition, the alpaca will actually come in a lot of different colors, which pretty much makes it exempt from needing to dye its fleece in the examples of like more natural colors, because they come in every shade of white, gray, black, brown, and everything in between there. Now, while I have plenty of information to talk about, let's discuss the exhibit that we're working on. So we are making a layered section that we are going to have the top be where you could walk and looking out over the drop-offs. This is to give not only a good view of the actual exhibit and the alpacas while you're not within range to touch them, it is also something that will give a more cultural feel to it, since how a lot of the mountainous peoples that lived in the Andes would make these sort of terraces to use as much of the space as possible. Now, they also were famous for these large square and rectangular formations left over from their old ruins. Unfortunately, a lot of them are dilapidated and destroyed, and there isn't too much of a good idea of what they would look like at full size, so I decided that I was just going to make ruins, essentially. Now, as you may know, if you've seen some of the other episodes, I am not good at building actual buildings. I'm much better at making natural environments and making it work that way. So what we're going to do first is I'm going to make something to prove that I am completely inept at it. Maybe one day I will get better, but not really put my eggs in that basket quite yet. But we are also going to use it so that we can block off the entrance, which I like to do just so that it doesn't look as invasive of the zookeepers. And I did find out later that the distance I put the building to the door actually ends up that the alpaca will straight up spawn on the correct side of the wall. So I'm happy accidents, just like Bob Ross says. But I'm making this first building, and I'm just going to use one of the prefabs for the one I'm going to put on the lower terrace. And hopefully you don't mind me doing that. A little bit of cheating, but that's why the blueprints are there. Not all of us are architect students. Some of us went to school for business. So back to the information we have on the alpaca. Now, there is something very interesting when it comes to the alpaca, and it is another reason why it's domesticated. However, it was something that didn't really come about, at least intellectually, until recently. So it had always been a part of domestication in agriculture with, its fleece and meat. However, it is found that in the more modern times, alpacas make a phenomenal emotional support animal. It is described that they are very appealing to look at. They have a very cute appearance with their long eyelashes, big eyes, and because they're smaller than llamas, they're much more cuddly than you would consider a llama. And it's also said that because of their very docile nature, they're very calming to be around. So, in addition to being livestock, they are a great emotional support animal if you can take care of them. Now, this is the second episode in a row, apparently, that we are going to bring up the pet side of the animal. And I have nothing against that, because pets really help you out when you don't have anyone. If you don't have a pet, as long as you can take care of it, I would highly recommend getting one, whether it be a bird, a lizard, dog, or cat. Even a fish, it's good to keep something close to you to help with your mental health if you live alone, like I do. So, what would it take to keep your alpaca nice and happy and healthy? Just before I get into this, before I lose my train of thought and it no longer becomes relevant, if you take a look at what I'm doing here, it is noted that the terraces, unlike the one that you may remember from the Asian river otter that the rice pads were made of just being a sort of a straight drop in soil, in these old Incan ruins, they would actually set up stones to keep the proper drop-off. Now, back on track. Alpacas are both a grass-grazing and an arboreal grazing animal, which means they will eat the grass like a cow or goat, but they'll also eat tree leaves. And interestingly enough, they actually have quite a few adaptations to help them in their endeavors in eating tree leaves. Obviously, they have the long neck, which gives them an advantage, just like a giraffe, but they also have a prehensile lip. So most people, when they think of prehensile, they think of either a tail or maybe even a tongue, but a lot of animals have a prehensile lip, so it'll help them actually grab the branch, bring it closer to their mouth, and get the leaves that they're looking for. Now, they also are going to need a decent amount of room to move around. The Zoopedia in-game pretty much gives the idea of about 400 square meters, which isn't too much in all reality. As a matter of fact, there is an alpaca that lives not too far from where I'm from. It lives, unfortunately, on its own with its caretakers, so it has been dubbed the loneliest alpaca in Pennsylvania, but I'm sure it does quite fine. Especially with its thick coat, I'm sure the winters aren't too bad, and I'm sure the owners take good care of it because it has been out and about frolicking more times than I remember. Speaking of which, they are a very energetic animal and have been known to sort of frolic, for a lack of a better word, sort of bounding with their hooves in sort of a jogging or even, I guess you could almost call it hopping style. And it is probably one of the cutest things I have ever seen. Now, as you can see, we're adding that prefab that I discussed using a few minutes ago. And quite honestly, it's an absolute time saver. So don't be afraid to use it, especially if you have other things. If you're not using more than just a few prefabs, it really helps with that. Now, let's talk about the new interactable or in-exhibit walkways that you can have. I personally think that this way is the best, to have sort of the visible path with the addition of adding some soil, or pretty much filling it with either sand or soil. That way it stands out, and even though it is a set path that they can't leave, it gives it more of a proper look to it. Now, we're also going to start adding in all the little extra elements to give it more life. Seeing how this is an animal from a mountainous region, I wanted to pretty much make little mountains or cliff faces to sort of make it so it's not just a single fence all the way around. I always felt like just a fence is just a little boring. While I'm sure there's ways to make it look good with just a fence, I prefer not to. But if we go back to the alpaca itself, as I make these little sides here, the alpaca has a very interesting adaptation in its hooves, and that is that they are padded. Now, it still has the normal hoof style to it. However, it is tipped, almost like a phone stylus. You've got the actual hard part of the pen itself, and then the tip that's sort of meant to be somewhat similar to the finger. It's similar in that way, and that is to help them get a good grip on the stones of the mountains that they live on. And a very interesting side effect of that is, because it's not a hard, sharp hoof like most other animals, it means it's actually fairly good at breaking up and fertilizing soil while not damaging the like tilled fields or other farmland. So it'll help fertilize the natural soil and not damage usable soil for crops, which probably added to why they were so popular in an agricultural sense. Something that you could just let roam about, and even if it ended up walking into and through your crops, there's not too much stress that they're going to cause damage. Now, you probably don't want them eating your crops, but at the same time, you can at least not worry that their mere presence is going to cause damage. So, there is also a very interesting point that I should have brought up during the fleece section, but in all honesty, it can still work here. I'm going to make it work here. You know what? Don't doubt yourself. Sometimes you just got to go with it. So there are actually two species of alpaca. One is known as the wakaya, and the other is the suri. Now, the wakaya is the one that has that fluffy, sort of wool-style coat to it, which is the one that is mostly used for the fur trade. The suri actually has a smoother, almost silky fur pattern, which can still be used. However, it's not as preferred as the wakaya. Now, with the fence, you'll notice that I had sort of the wood fence up by the entrance, and that is because I wanted to make it more of the farmland experience for the guests, while further down by the ruins, it's stone to make it fit more. This way it gives it a more aesthetic and themed feel that would match with the actual exhibit itself. Now, you don't want to put too much foliage. However, little accents like the flowers and the bushes can both provide enough cover and then also really just make the exhibit pop more. Now, a very useful foliage addition that they have in the game that would match well if you are doing some form of Native American, or in this case, Incan-inspired exhibit, is corn. Corn was native to the Americas and was one of the main agricultural products from the New World. More specifically, they knew it as maize, but we now know it today as corn. This will give it, again, a more fitting form of vegetation to show that there was once civilization here, and it has somewhat been taken over by nature. Now, I do feel it would be fitting if they allowed the taiga environment to be used with the alpaca, as the taiga kind of is a substitute for alpine or mountainous foliage. However, the grassland and temperate certainly do work, and it can make a very interesting looking exhibit. Now, as I start adding all the toys and the food for our alpacas, let's discuss the last bit of information I have about them, and that is probably something that they're very famous for, and that is their propensity for spitting. So, alpacas, llamas, and pretty much all forms of camelid actually will spit at either a possible threat or even one another to sort of keep them in line. However, it's not spit like we would imagine. It's actually bile. Alpacas, again, along with other camelids, have chambered stomachs. Many grazing animals have that, and that's to help digest plant matter. And in that first chamber is where they actually will store this. Well, let's continue to call it spit, because it's calling it bile is quite gross, to be completely honest. And it's much more of a deterrent, seeing how it isn't actually saliva, because it smells awful. It is partially acidic, and of course, you get spit in the face and tell me you don't want to deal with whatever is spitting in your face. So, with all of that considered, you could see why it is actually a fairly reasonable form of self-defense. Now, because when I add the alpacas, it turns out that I have a perfect environment for them, I'm going to wrap this up with some of the reproductive facts. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to get weird on you. I'm just going to discuss a few more little tidbits, like the fact that the alpaca actually has a very long gestation period, especially for an animal of its size, and it is actually about 11 and a half months long. So, to give you an idea, that's roughly 2.5 more months than a person would gestate, aka be pregnant. They usually only have one offspring, known as a cria, and there are times when they can have twins, but it is very unlikely. So, that is all the information I have on this lovely animal. If there's anything else you would like to add, or if you have any questions, feel free to ask in the comments down below. If you like, leave a like. However, I do hope to see you again, and the next one we will be jumping into the alpine goat, because I want to catch up before I go back to my standard list. With that all being said, I hope you have a good one. Go outside, enjoy the world. Bye bye.